Today on Film Friday, I'll be taking a look at the 90s cult classic, Death Becomes Her. Let's begin. Death Becomes Her is a black comedy written by Martin Donovan and David Coop and directed by Robert Zemeckis. It tells the story of longtime frenemies Madeline Ashton and Helen Sharp, whose at the time fiancé Ernest Menville leaves Helen for her back in the late 70s. Now in the 90s, Helen is a successful best-selling author still in her youth, while Madeline is obsessed with preserving her youth to the point where she's willing to take a magic potion in order to regain her beauty and live forever. However, it turns out Helen took the same potion back in the 80s and has been plotting Madeline's demise out of revenge. And the two run into a dilemma where they find out the hard way what happens when their now immortal bodies have a sudden run-in with death.
On guard, bitch!
Death Becomes Her was a movie that, as a 4-year-old child, I always wanted to see, but never had the opportunity to actually watch. I remember being around like 4 or 5 years old, catching trailers and snippets of the movie on like HBO and finding the special effects absolutely astounding, which was rightfully one of the selling points at the time. Of course, my mom wouldn't let me watch the whole movie outside of trailers that would appear on TV or previews on HBO that aired before what we were originally going to watch. So over time, all I really had reference to the film were memory images of the women Madeline and Helen. And soon, it was only that. Because it was so far back in my memory that I would always remember that it was a movie I've never seen but always wanted to, but couldn't remember the name of it to save my life. Like back then, if you showed me a clip or an image of the movie, I'd go, yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. I've been wanting to see that ever since I was like, 5 years old? What is it called again? And then you would say, Death Becomes Her, and I'd go, oh, right, that's right, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Spoiler alert, I never kept it in mind. However, I recently made an active decision to not only remember what the movie is called, but to actually watch it. Which means, at the tender age of 33, I will be watching this 1992 film for the first time. No sense of nostalgia to hinder my judgment or spark any biases. And the result of that was... it was alright. Now, don't get me wrong, readers, I wasn't expecting anything spectacular or any groundbreaking commentary on 90s society when I decided to watch this film for the first time. I had no expectations for Death Becomes Her at all. But I'm not gonna lie and say that I didn't have a few questions about the things that I've heard about the movie regarding the cult classic status it gained over time, and the overall build-up to finally seeing it after all these years and deciding to dig a bit deeper afterwards kinda satisfied my curiosity. Basically, Death Becomes Her, according to what I've seen, is camp. And I mean the aesthetic style of camp. It's described as ostentatious, exaggerated, affected, and theatrical, and this was definitely that. What helps the camp translate so well is that the movie is a dark comedy with a sense of macabre, especially when it comes to Helen and Madeline after their deaths. It's also in that campiness that a lot of its comedy works for me as well, like the deadpan transition scenes.
I have absolutely no interest in Madeline Ashton.
And the sudden appearance of the spa owner that recommends Leslie to Madeline, even though he was nowhere in the room when discussions were first started. And it's because the movie can be classified as camp, this allows the main characters, Madeline and Helen, to be looked at as satirical depictions of certain types of women themselves. especially considering satire and camp usually play off very well with each other, and how it also uses exaggeration in order to expose flaws in people, governments, societies, and corporations. In the case of Death Becomes Her, because the movie is written by two men in the early 90s, the satire in the film is highlighting the lengths some women will go to one-up each other and stay relevant. On Helen's end, this is represented in the blatant fat phobia present in the movie. Both the fat suit used for Ellen's depression 7 years after Madeline seduced Ernest to marrying her instead, and the doctor assigned to her in the psychiatric hospital.
6 months of therapy, you're not even 1 pound lighter, and we are still talking about Madeline Aston?
And the way she weaponizes both feminist solidarity against Madeline.
You didn't steal him. He went to you.
And internalized misogyny against Ernest.
I always knew it was her. She's a woman. A woman, Ernest. From Newark, for God's sakes.
After she drinks the potion as part of phase 1 of her plans for revenge against Madeline, with her rejuvenated looks and success to try and win Ernest back. Madeline, on the other hand, struggles with relevancy and validation, more specifically through her beauty. She covets Helen's weight loss and youth, reflecting back when they were both in their 30s in 1978, before learning about and she knew Helen took Leslie's potion.
How old is she?
50.
She resents Ernest now that he's no longer a renowned plastic surgeon.
Rose!
Oh, it's you.
She's a cradle robber, which, if she were a man, would be acceptable, but because she's a woman, the act is shown as one of desperation.
You should go find someone your own age, Madeline.
She's a very satirical take on the ideology of beauty is only skin deep, in which she's obsessed to reclaim her youth because she can't cope with her current aging process, reflecting her mean-spiritedness and backstabbing ways. Madeline and Helen are both terrible people. And so is Ernest, real talk. I'm not going to let him off the hook that easily just because he had a change of heart. But it's only when they end up immortal corpses after all the scheming, conniving, and fighting that they decided to actually just sit down and talk things out. However, because of the campiness applied to both the setting and time period, and because of the satirical exaggeration Helen and Madeline represent, the combination of both, when the movie is looked at with either eyes that have matured since the last time it's been seen, or eyes that haven't had the privilege to be shielded with nostalgia goggles, allows this specific mix of camp and satire to be easily translated as social commentary regarding how women were forced to interact with both society and each other in a world that will easily write them and their femininity off if they're no longer vibrant or marketable, and take extreme chances in order to reclaim and remain as such. And while I can definitely see that being a clever yet unintentional social commentary Death Becomes Her ends up making in its narrative, thanks to me being, and the two main characters who do so much whack shit and get away with it, thanks to them being, all I was able to think about while watching them is how accurate the saying is about how quickly problematic Snow Sisters age physically. I also think that's what initially got in my way of being able to completely resonate with how this is such a cult classic within the LGBT community. Another factor I couldn't wait to witness about this film once I initially learned about it. So, while drag queer culture is not necessarily my queer culture, drag queer culture loves Death Becomes Her, and I can kinda understand why. They saw the unintentional social commentary about how women and femininity are treated overall and are forced to act and utilize it in the patriarchy and went with it, while visually attracted to the old Hollywood glam Helen and Madeline constantly show off and pay homage to. And even though they acknowledge that Madeline and Helen are clearly villains, they also see them as queer icons in the way a lot of queer-coded Disney villains are, thanks to the way they scheme against each other, fight with each other, and end up with each other. I completely understand that angle of queer relatability when it comes to Madeline and Helen and Death Becomes Her. And if you want more resources regarding understanding the queer-coded Disney villain angle, I'll have links to both Rowan Ellis and Matt Baum's video on the subject in the description down below. However, outside of how everyone who enjoys this movie has been able to pick up on the hidden commentary it makes, I cannot, for the life of me, refuse to even believe y'all when you tell me that these women are oppressed. Upon researching the LGBT attraction to the movie, I came across a piece Vanity Fair published in 2017 to celebrate its 25th anniversary, and saw this quote from longtime executive producer of RuPaul's Drag Race, Tom Campbell, regarding Helen and Madeline. He said, "They're fighting for beauty. They're fighting against the system. They're also villains, but we understand their complexity. We root for the undead divas because they're trying to win a game that's rigged against them. And to borrow an apocryphal quote from Ginger Rogers, they sort of have to do it backwards and in high heels." That sure is one way to interpret their plight. Okay, no. I can't hold my tongue regarding this situation. Against the system? The game is rigged against them? These rich white women? Yes, Madeline is a fading star, but she still lives in a mansion in Beverly Hills and is clearly still handsomely living off her film royalties in order to afford both regular and spontaneous spa treatments. I mean, she's not making over $600K a year like Mariah Carey is every time All I Want for Christmas Is You plays on the radio during the holiday season, but shit sure the fuck don't look like she's wanting for anything. And sure, the potion initially cost Helen everything she had when she got it in the 80s. But look at her now! In the 90s! Where the initial story of the movie takes place. She's a best-selling author who also lives in Beverly Hills and can talk about casually firing her assistant just for speaking the truth about anticipating how someone will react to receiving an invitation.
I fired her. Well, I almost fired her.
Well, that was sweet of you, dear.
Like, why would Tom Campbell even think this if we saw the same movie? What does he even look... Okay. Alright. Okay. Alright. So, Tom Campbell, 12-year producer of RuPaul's Drag Race and various spin-offs, and 4-year producer of $1 Million Listings New York, has every right to his opinion, just like I do. And my opinion is that his opinion comes from a very privileged place. Now, I don't know his story, I don't know his journey. It could be 100% rags to riches for all I know. But considering the quote that I read and how it's supposed to be applied to the movie that I just watched, it tells me, a 33-year-old black queer male living in America who is trying to fight the system and actually knows what it's like to have the game rigged against him, that he, like other ghastly gay men before him, couldn't help but take the opportunity to play the white that called oppressed in this instance. There are plenty of movies that give off the same social commentary Death Becomes Her does, some of them on purpose, and actually illustrate what Tom Campbell and queer folk like him think they see when they think of Death Becomes Her, according to the statement that he gave in said article. But in order for them to do that, they have to be prepared to not see themselves, and by themselves I mean their skin tone, be front and center in the narrative. Despite the queer relatability to the initial commentary it accidentally makes, Death Becomes Her does not allow you to experience that. Because the movie is first and foremost presented as a piece featuring iconic yet horrible porcelain people basking in their privilege and falling apart, literally, when things don't work out the way they need them to in order for them to benefit from it. And if you need more proof within the movie that the white gaze is the main gaze for it, then just look at who makes up the majority of Leslie's clientele from the party she threw them at the end of the movie. There are only like 7-ish specks of pepper in a fucking sea of salt. Oh my god! Oh my god! Now, am I saying that this movie isn't worth watching? Absolutely not. Outside of the hot messes that are Madeline and Helen, watching Bruce Willis play someone not action-oriented or tough and grizzled was actually refreshing. Also, the very feel of this movie, from the camera angles, the set design, and even the visual warmth from the very film itself, just immediately visually told me that I was watching a Universal Studios movie from the 1990s. And while Robert Zemeckis' direction for the film was, in my opinion, a bit generic compared to how he handled like the Back of the Future trilogy and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I was able to immediately recognize Alan Silvestri's mark on the film's score. I know a lot of kids nowadays only know him as the composer who made the theme for the Avengers. But thanks to Back to the Future, Predator, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and yes, even Super Mario Bros., my ears are able to pick up a soundtrack of his just as well as hearing Danny Elfman and John Williams from a crowd. Thankfully, Alan Silvestri's music is the only thing about Death Becomes Her that I let nostalgia take hold of when I watched the movie, because I don't think I would have been able to be as unbiased as I was watching the movie if I were revisiting it, even if it played a part in my queer development like a lot of other individuals. So with that being said, I feel I must repeat this. Death Becomes Her is a movie I've always wanted to watch in its entirety ever since I was around 4 or 5 years old. Now that I've seen it in its entirety for the first time as a 33-year-old man, I'm fine with never having to see it again. It's not that I don't like or appreciate the campiness of it or the satire that complements it when it comes to Helen and Madeline's dynamic, and it's definitely not because I didn't find it funny in most places. I think that because I've seen movies that better combine camp and satire in ways that are less dated according to the decade and intentionally give off the social commentary that this movie delivered since this was released, I think the ship has sailed for me to truly appreciate Death Becomes Her on the level that a lot of others do. And honestly, I'm kind of fine with that. Right now, you can rent Death Becomes Her for as little as $4 anywhere that allows digital rental streams. But if you want to own it and also help financially support the channel, I'll have an affiliate link for you in the description down below. So with that being said, readers, your homework assignment for the day. Write in the comment section below what you thought of Death Becomes Her if you've seen it. Film Friday is possible thanks to my generous supporters over on Patreon, so if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, you can join it by clicking the card at the end of the video or in the link in the description down below, where you can also find a link to my merchandise store. Or if you prefer to give a one-time donation, you can find links to my PayPal and my Ko-fi account in the description box as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. But until then, this is Readus 101. Class dismissed.